Natalie Pearman was found dead over 20 years ago on November 20th, 1992. Her killer has never been found. I'm keen to get behind the real story of this case and to discover how a young girl's life could have deteriorated so disastrously and so quickly. In visiting the places she used to frequent and the people who know about the case, I'm hoping we'll get some new leads and some new insights. After years with no answers or solid leads, my cold case team is stepping in to help the authorities with this difficult case. By re-examining old evidence, speaking to witnesses, and collaborating with key investigators, they're hoping to bring new information to light. Our team has uncovered key information in many cases like this and is committed to leaving no stone unturned in the search for Natalie's killer. So what do you think is a likely motivation of the perpetrator of this case?
We know that she was working that night, and we know she was picked up by 2 clients and left back.
So, I mean, one other name looms large in this investigation.
It's an incredibly violent world, and pimps rule that.
She was hanging around with a crowd down at the seafront and taking drugs recreationally.
There's nothing romantic, I think, about the world of working girls.
This is Cowper Close, a small cul-de-sac just off Northfield Road in the south of Natalie's hometown. Natalie Pearman grew up on this small estate in the seaside town of Munsley, north of Norwich. And here she lived with her mom Lynn, her stepdad Chris, and her siblings. It's understood she was interested in ballet and horses, and by all accounts had a pretty unremarkable and normal childhood.
Munsley is not a particularly well-off place. I think probably typically of a lot of coastal towns and small places around Britain. I think at the time kids were probably living there would have said, hey, there's nothing to do here. You know, it didn't have its own cinema probably, it didn't have its own facilities or clubs or whatever. So places like Norwich, would have seemed like the real bright lights maybe to people living out in Munsley. I suppose in common with Yarmouth and similar places in Norfolk, not a lot of money there, quite a lot of people out of work. So those kind of places, I think particularly in the winter months, they can be quite isolating, and I think for teenagers growing up in those kind of places, it's quite natural to kind of want away and to look for something a little bit more exciting.
As she was growing up in this small village, increasingly the opportunities for her, as far as she could determine, seemed to become more limited.
But despite this, I've discovered that Natalie appears to have been part of a happy family unit in her early years.
It's such a sad story because, like a lot of these cases, Natalie actually started off, really well in life.
Natalie Pearman wanted to join the RAF, wanted to travel the world, she had dreams, she had aspirations.
So in a lot of ways she had a very kind of normal and good upbringing.
But things appear to have changed dramatically when Natalie reached her early teens.
When she got to the age of 14, she appeared to become somewhat of a wild child.
Slowly she became, I think, involved with other kids in the area, kind of sitting about on the beach, smoking dope, having sex down on the beach. And I think that was her kind of initial entry into a slightly different world, really.
And that made her rebel in the way teenagers often do. That made her rebel against her mother and her stepfather.
But I've discovered that it wasn't just Natalie who was deteriorating at that time. Her entire family life appeared to be collapsing around her. Her stepfather was now out of work, and her mother, Lynn, had given up her job to look after the children. There was clearly huge pressure on the family. And it's become apparent to my cold case team as well that Natalie had simply become a product of her environment. She was a rebellious but very normal child, and her life descended into mayhem.
Very quickly. I mean, she seemed to have had a very ordinary childhood, but as she hit about 14, she became very troubled and ended up being put into care. In a very short space of time, she was hanging around with a crowd down at the seafront and taking drugs recreationally.
The frightening thing is, Clive, is that even her rebellious moments, by today's standards, were not that rebellious. And yet she was accelerated into care, and then her world descended into hell, nearly.
I think that the family situation generally was slightly chaotic. I think mum and dad had sort of work problems, employment problems, and they were in a very, very tiny town. There was only 2,500 and an area, I think, where sort of not a lot for the young folk to do. And sometimes I think, sadly, which is becoming apparent now, going into care sometimes is actually as disastrous as not being in care, sometimes mixed with other young folk that have equal problems. It seems to me that her descent into drug abuse accelerated her behavioural problems.
As Natalie's connection with her family became more fractured, as she became more involved and entranced with her drug and alcohol-fueled lifestyle, she rapidly slipped into a seedy, depraved underworld from which few of those who become part of it emerge unscathed. November 19th, 1992. Thursday was a busy night on the block, and Natalie had a number of clients that evening.
She was seen in the red light district on a number of occasions prior to her being found.
She walked from Drayton Road to Tombland in the centre of Norwich, and she picked up her first client there. It was a taxi driver, and he took her to Whittlingham, which is just on the other side of the river. She had sex in the back seat of the taxi with this first client. She was then brought back into Norwich. She then picked up a second client and went off to his home and had sex with him, and was then dropped back into Norwich safely. And the last time she was actually seen alive was outside the Ferryboat pub, and that's on the corner of King Street and Rouen Road, which is, you know, right in the heart of the red light area. And I think that was about 1 o'clock in the morning.
Natalie Pearman had been working the street since before midnight that night. Her other clients testified to her whereabouts up to her last known sighting sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning. What happened to her after that remains a mystery.